Welcome back. So in our Selenium with Java series, today we are going to see how we can handle Selenium exceptions and what are exactly the different types of Selenium exceptions are there. Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing, what are exceptions? So exceptions are basically abnormal or unexpected conditions that may occur while running the code or the test. Okay, so these exceptions may disrupt your execution. It means that it can abort your execution or stop your execution, but we can handle these Java exceptions or the Selenium exceptions using Java features. Okay, so we can even avoid them depending on what exception we are expecting. Now, to know what kind of exception you might get it, you need to understand all of the Selenium exceptions available. Okay, so for almost all kind of abnormal situations that may occur in the program, Java has a class for each of those expected conditions. Okay, so because of certain reasons your execution might stop, right? Now for each and every reason that the Selenium is stopping the execution, for all those reasons Selenium put few of the exceptions, or it has categorized those exceptions. Let's say if you're not getting the element but you're trying to operate something, or you're trying to perform certain action on an element but that element is not found, so you will get element not found exception. The same thing, you are trying to reach out to an alert, or maybe you are performing an alert action but the alert is not found. So all those different kinds of situations, Selenium provided couple of exceptions that we are going to learn today. Now, before going to that, let's see the Selenium documentation and see what are the different types of Selenium exceptions are present. And the same thing I have picturized here. So as we know all that object is the parent class of Java, that is the top level parent class, and which is inherited by throwable class. And there is a error, we know that there is some fatal errors are coming where the execution might stop. The same thing, exceptions, which because of the human error, because of the syntaxes, so anything that is stopping your execution is called as exception. Now these exceptions are kind of, again there is a child exception, that is runtime exception. And from this runtime exception, Selenium has created its own exception class, that is WebDriver exception. Okay, so this WebDriver exception is again divided into two different categories. One is the not found exception, which is like, as I told, if there is some element is not found but you are trying to perform certain action. So the same thing, no alert exception, no such context, where you are switching to a context but that context is not present. No such cookie, like let's say that you are trying to uh, do some kind of edits or delete operation for a cookie, but the cookie is not present. For an element, we already discussed. Frame, let's say you are switching to a frame but the frame is not present. The same thing, you are trying to switch to a window, new window, but the window is not exist at that moment. So that is where actually you will be getting all these kind of exceptions. On the other hand, there are few more exceptions are present. No such session, not found exception, screenshot exception. Let's say you are trying to take a screenshot but your application is not supporting. So there are certain applications where it can restrict to take screenshot from the user. Session not created exception, so you're trying to create a new session but the session is not creating. There is some Selenium server issue or something, you will get session not created. Stale element, this is again a peculiar behavior of the Selenium, we will be talking in detail. Timeout exception, any new WebDriver weight you are using and where it is passing the specified limit but it's not satisfying the conditions. Okay, so that's where you will be getting timeout exception. Now the question comes, why do you need to understand these exceptions? What are the benefits? So one benefit I would say, let's say that you have written 100 different test cases are there. Okay, and that is being executed by a CI/CD pipeline which might be executing on a night time, and the next day morning you are coming to your desk and you are looking into there are 50 test cases got failed out of 100, Now, how do you understand that where exactly the problems are there? And by it's just failed, right? But you don't know where exactly failed, so that's where the exception is coming into picture. Okay. So like for an instance, in that five test cases said that no such element exception on this particular line. So it's easy, right? You can just go to that particular test case and try to see, because it is no such element, I need to see whether the locator strategy which I have added is really working fine or not. Is it like the application locators got changed? They have changed some of the attribute values or something. The same thing, few couple of test cases you are trying to switch to an alert, but the alert is not found because there is some bug in your application. So by looking into no such alert exception, you can directly pinpoint that there is some problem with the alert. So you need not to debug the entire test case if there is any issue is coming. So that's where actually these exceptions are handy. Now let's look into the documentation real quick. So here is the Selenium documentation from Java, and you can see the same structure, just I have made it a good pictorial representation, but they're talking about the same way only. Object throwable, and then there is a WebDriver exception which is very much specific to the Selenium. You can see till here it is Java based, what do you call, classes are there, and this WebDriver exception holds all different type of exception that Selenium supports. Okay, for sure, actually, you don't need to remember or by heart all these exceptions, but it is easy to, but it is good to understand all these exceptions. Okay, so let's get started. So for each of these exceptions, we will be trying to recreate this scenario where the exception can occur and how do we handle that. Fine. So let me go to my IntelliJ, and here I will create a new package. Let's say I will be talking as exceptions. Okay. And inside this, I will be creating a new class. Okay. Let's say exception test. Okay. Fine. Now here, so for this, I might be using different applications, or if it is possible, we will just see with one demo application. So you guys are very familiar with this demo site, right? So github.io/demo. Okay. So we will try to use this kind of what do you call, this demo application to recreate all different type of exceptions. Okay. So for this, the first thing, let me try to do a copy paste from somewhere here. Okay, so the same line of code I'm writing here, and instead of gecko I will try to do for Chrome driver, and here I will say Chrome driver, and here again the same thing, Chrome driver. Okay, fine. So we are done with our template. Okay, so now let's say the first thing. Okay, so here let's say that I'm trying to identify this particular name field, and which is having an ID as username. Okay, so I will say driver dot find element by dot ID, and here, oops, that was not intended, username dot send case, and then I will write something here. Fine, fair simple, and this will definitely work because I'm using the correct locator strategy. But let's say that for some reason the application got changed the username to something else. Let's say that the username was before as username 1. Okay, I mean, when I was writing the test case, it was username 1, so everything happened correctly. It was working fine. The next day, when I was executing this particular test case, the developer changed the locator strategy from, I mean, the ID from username 1 to username. Now, when I execute this one, okay, now it's launching the browser, but you can see it got failed. The reason is that it is giving you the line number, but what is that fail? So if we if there is no exception, how do we understand why is it this particular line of code is failing? That's where I told you you have to look into the exception, and the exception says that it's a no such element exception. You can see the reason also it is telling that you were trying to what do you call trying to look into an element with a css selector as username 1, but it's not found because the ID got changed from username 1 to just username. Okay, so that's where actually we can understand, and now we can go to that line and fix the code, save it, and then make it ready for our next execution. So that's where you can identify that even though it's giving the line number where it is throwing, where it have created the issue, but we should be knowing what is that issue, then only we can debug it, right? So that is where no such element exception is coming into the picture. Fine. Now let's understand some other features or some other exceptions. There is one more exception is there, no alert present exception. Now, when exactly where exactly we are getting the exception? So let's say I'm clicking on this submit button and there is an alert is coming, and I just say that alert.accept, so it just closes that alert. Fine. Now let's say I'm moving into this particular application and I'm clicking on the home button and I'm expecting one alert. Okay, now let's see what happens. So here I will say driver dot find element by dot, I think that's a name that I know, so I'm just going as home and then I'm saying click. Okay, and here what I'm doing, I'm expecting an alert. So if I'm expecting an alert, what I need to do, driver dot switch to, we already learned this one, right? So alert, and alert is a method, and I will say dot accept. That's it. Now I'm clicking on the home button, accepting an alert. That's why I'm switching to that alert and accepting it. Let's see that. Okay, it clicked on the home button, but the alert didn't appear. But what I was expecting, an alert. Now let's see the exception, what it is telling. Now if you see here, it's telling that no search or no alert present exception because there is no such alert. And then you can identify which line is this. So you can go back to that line and you can see, okay, I was expecting an alert. So it could be because of the application is having some issue that you're performing an action and you're expecting that alert, or maybe you have written it wrongly here. So that is what you need to identify after looking into the test results. Okay, so that's how the no alert exception is coming into the picture. Okay, let me comment it so that it don't throw me again the same exception. Make sure that these exceptions whatever you are getting, the test case will fail at that instance only. It will not execute the further test code because it's stopping or it's aborting your test case. So that is what you need to make sure that. So if you have, let's say you have written 10 different steps and the exception appeared on the first step, then the 9 other steps will not be executing. If you think somewhere that even though the exception is coming and I want to continue my execution, so that's where you have to handle the exception in a graceful way. And for that, we can use the Java try catch block. For an instance, let's say that I'm writing like this and I'm clicking on this home button. Now, here I'm kind of again going back to this. Let's say this is the step that I'm following. Okay, let me go to, yeah, here let me click on this and I want to click on this link. Okay, this is my sign up form, right? So here I will say driver dot find element by dot, it's a link, right? So I can say link text, oops, dot click. So this is the step. Now so I'm clicking on this username and sending some value. Then I'm clicking on this home button, expecting an alert. And then I'm clicking on this sign up link to come back to this screen again. Now let's say there are 3 steps involved. Now if I'm saying, okay, I mean the alert may or may not appear. So if I if the alert, I'm expecting an alert, but alert is not there, this will not execute this line of code. So that's where I have to handle this. If exception occurs also, you go to the next line of code. For this, as I told, I need to use a try block. Okay, simple thing, it's a Java try block, I need to use it. Now what I will do, inside try block I will write the action. If this is not, like, let's say if there is an alert is coming, for sure you click on that alert and come back to the next line of code. But what happens if there is an exception occurs here? So what you can do, you can catch it and you can say exception, which is the parent class of all exceptions, right? Or else you can even give here no alert exception as well. If you're sure about that, this line will be throwing me no alert exception. And here you can just say that, you can just catch it. You can say no alert. Now, though this test case will fail, but it will even come back to this line of code. Let me show you that. So that is the way you can handle the exceptions. But yeah, it's better practice to not to handle all the exceptions, because you might not be knowing that what is getting failed in your application. So you have to be careful when you are using the try catch block. Okay, so that is how you can handle the exceptions. Let me just comment all these things. Okay, so the same thing, you have other exception as well. Like, let's say that no such frame exception. So you are switching to a frame, okay, but that frame is not found at that moment. For an instance, let's say that I'm going to this iframe and there is this frame, right, which is, let's go back to here. Oops, this is opened by Selenium, so let me open my own browser window. Let's say that you are going to here and you are trying to identify a frame, or you're switching to a frame. Let me show you that it's exactly a frame. Okay, you can see here the frame name is frame1, right? Let's say I'm trying to go to a frame and this is the URL, and I can't click on this button, right? But here what I'm doing, driver dot switch to, and then I'm saying frame. Let's say I'm telling frame 3, which is not exactly there, but I want to switch to that frame. Okay, now in this case what will happen, let's see. Okay, your test case got failed. Okay, there is some problem. You can see the problem is that no such frame exception, because I'm trying to switch to a frame which is not even present on the screen. So that's where you will be getting no such frame exception. Let's say that there was a frame when you have written your script, but for some reason the frame is missing from your application. So that time you will get no such frame exception, and you can go back and look into the your test case, and you can talk to your developer about the issue. Fine, so these are all different kind of exceptions, which if it is not found, it will throw you the specific exceptions. Fine, there is a timeout exception. This is very peculiar exception. This occurs when you are using the expected conditions or the WebDriver wait, right? So we have seen the implicit wait and explicit wait in our previous sessions. Now let me recreate the same scenario. Let's say new, okay, WebDriver wait, new WebDriver wait driver, that is my first one, and I need to see the duration of seconds. Let's say that I want to wait for 5 seconds. Okay, now here, oops, not 50, so duration, and I will say dot, and I will say until what expected conditions, and I will say dot. Let me put it into a new line. Okay, expected conditions dot presence of element located, and the by locator is by dot id, and I will say username. Okay, username. Now I'm just waiting for that element. Once I have waited for that element, let's say that I'm identifying that element and I'm clicking on that. Okay, so that is username, and here I'm saying send keys, and I will say something here. Fine. Let's say that if the element is present, it will just go wait for certain amount of time and then it will click on this. I mean, it will perform the action on that particular element. Let's say that I have given a wrong locator or the locator got changed. Okay, in that case, this new WebDriver wait will be failed and you will be getting one exception. Let's see that exception. And for this I need to turn on this particular URL. Okay, the sign up page. Now let's execute this one. Okay, so it will wait for 5 seconds because I've given wrong username or user ID, right? So you can see, and there has to be a timeout exception you will be getting. Let's go here. Yeah, you can see timeout exception. The reason is that you have expectation condition failed because you are waiting for an ID with username 1, but there is nothing. No username 1 ID is present. So that is why you are getting. So any kind of exception, any kind of expected conditions, let's say that alert is present, or you are saying your presence of all element, clickable event, anything that you are using, any condition with new WebDriver wait, if that fails, irrespective of the conditions, it will give you the timeout exception. So don't get surprised when you get a generalized timeout exception. One good thing is that it is giving you the line number. So by going into the line number, you can see what condition is that is got failed. So based on that condition, you can identify the issue. Fine. Okay. So that is all about your timeout exception. And then there is something called as stale element exception. Right now, as I told, it's a very peculiar behavior, and it's is I mean, most of the way you are designing your framework, you will be getting these stale element exceptions. Okay, now I will give you one what do you call the definition of the stale element exception, where it is coming. So let's say a scenario where I will show you that by creating a new test. I don't want to club together here. So let me just go here and I will say stale test. Okay, I'm giving here. Let me minimize this, and let's say that everything else I'm deleting here because I don't need all these things. Fine. Okay, so think about a situation where you are going to this particular what do you call URL, and you are identifying one element, and that is nothing but username equal to, you copy your entire thing. Okay, so normally we tend to do like this, right? So first thing what we do, username, okay, dot clear we say, so that if there is anything is already entered, you just delete those content. Then we call the same variable and then we send some value. Now here we write some other stuff, like let's say that you are filling all other details. Like if I go to this, let's say you identified this element, this text box, you entered some value, then you are going to the email, telephone, everything you are writing, and then you are clicking on the submit button, which will give you an alert and which will refresh your screen. Now after entering all the details, let's say you are trying to identify the value that you entered on this username field. For an instance, let's say that s out, and you will say username dot get attribute of value. Okay, now let me first run this code. You can see everything was perfectly fine, right? It just went to this login page, I mean the sign up screen. It just identified this element and then cleared the value, sent the value, and got the value as well. Like whatever we have entered, we got it. But let's say that while you are doing these two lines of code, in between that, the the application got refreshed. Okay, for some reason, let's say driver dot navigate dot refresh. Okay, now because this happens for some reason also, let's say that you are fetching something from the database, you are clicking on some events here which might refresh your screen. Now when it refreshes, what happens, the link to that DOM kind of changes. It means that even though the username stays with the id as it is, but when you are identifying this username or using this variable, right, that time your DOM gets refreshed. Okay, now when the DOM gets refreshed, the username that is pointing to this particular id gets delinked. Okay, or the reference will be gone when you are refreshing the screen. So that time if you are accessing the same variable, it will give you stale element exception. It means that the id is correct. I mean, there is no problem with this id or whatever locator strategy you are using, but the DOM reference is not present, it just refreshed. So that's why what Selenium is telling, if your application got refreshed for some reason, you have to relocate the same element. It means that now it's I'm refreshing here, right? Now let me first execute this. See, before refreshing it was executing fine. Now I'm refreshing the screen and trying to execute or using the same variable. So in a conventional situation it should work, right? Because the username nowhere it is gone, the username didn't change anything. Let's see what happens. Right click, run. Okay, it got refreshed and now it is trying to identify this the same username field, and you can see there is an exception came and the exception is stale element. You can see the definition as well. Element is not attached to the page document or the document object DOM. Okay, so it's not saying that the element locator got changed. It is still the same, but the somewhere the application got refreshed. So the straight solution is what you need to do. You need to, like, for some way, if you are thinking that your application got refreshed, then you have to re-identify or relocate the same element. Now you might be asking, like, okay, after this particular what do you call, the application got refreshed, I might have actually 10 or 15 elements I have located and performed the action. Now, do I really need to go each of these elements and relocate it? The answer is yes, but you shouldn't be doing that. You should be trying to find a better solution to do this one. Now, so I will show you that. So what are we doing here? So we are kind of fetching some value, right? So why not we can write an utility method. So whenever we are performing any action, we will not be using this variable, but we will be calling the same method which will identify and perform the action. Like here, if you see how many different actions we are performing, one is the clear event, another is sending the value, and then we are getting the value. So there are three different methods we are using or operations. So what I can do, instead of writing all this, I mean everywhere I'm expecting that the driver or the page might refresh in all of these lines of code, so I might not be doing the same thing, right? Like re-identifying the same element. Okay, so for this, let me write a utility method. So for an instance, I'm doing a void, and here I will say type. Okay, and inside this I'm sending a driver object and the value actually, or the by locator where I want to give, and the value. Okay, string value. Now here what I'm going to do, every time I will call this method, it will do like this: driver dot find element. So oops, sorry, this has to be the driver. Okay, and here I will say driver dot find element, and this find element will accept a by locator, right, which I'm passing from here. Now dot, I will say send keys, and I will type that value. That's it. I'm going to do this one. The same thing, let me copy paste for all other actions as well. Now let's say that clear, I want to clear something. Now the same thing, I don't want the value here, just these things, right? So I will say clear. Okay, now the same thing, what is the other one? Getting the text, right? So get text, and here I will be only getting these things, but here the return type would be string. Okay, and not void. Fine, and here I will say return driver dot find element dot get attribute of value. That's it. Okay, now here what I'm doing, I don't want to identify these elements now. So what I can do here, I will comment this one. Okay, let's say I'm commenting here as well. Okay, fine. Now let the refresh as it is, no problem with that. And then I'm even removing this one as well. Okay. Now what I'm going to do, instead of identifying that on the test case and then performing certain action, I will say clear, and here I will be passing all these things. So driver, I will say by dot. Okay, so I'm calling like this. And what is the problem here? Okay, it should be static, no problem. Make it static because I'm calling from the main method, right? Or else I have to create an object of that. So I don't want all those things at this moment. Just I'm showing the things only here. Now the second thing is that send keys, right? Which I have written inside type. And the same thing I will be writing here. And some value, that value is qavbox. Let the application now refresh it. Now I'm going to print something, that whatever it is printed. Now here I will say get text, and I will be copy pasting all these things. That's it. Okay, now you will see for sure I won't be getting any text, because after I got refreshed, the the entered value is become gone. So but I will not be getting the exception which I was getting because of this refresh. Let me show you that. Okay, as you can see, it passed. There is no issues with that, because every action I'm performing on an element, I'm re-identifying those elements. So in reality, you might say me that, oh, do I need to really call this method and pass all these things like every time by ID username, and here as well like by ID? Not really. We will try to write a good framework which will avoid all this entering or repeating sending the driver object by ID. And you might say that I have 200 test cases are there. In each test case, should I be writing these utility methods? Not really. You have to keep all these utility method into a separate location, I mean separate method or separate class, and all your test cases you will be calling these things, where the driver will be automatically appearing, so that you need not to send as a parameter. And also this by locators you need not to send like this, like by ID username in all of your 200 test cases. For sure, these things we will be keeping it by using the page object model concept. Okay, so that's how we will reduce the lines of code, reduce the repetitive passing parameters, and also the codes will be looking neater, and also it will avoid this tail element exception. Okay, so that is how you will be avoiding this tail element exception. Fine. So with that, we have covered almost all kind of exceptions. There is one more exception. You will get not found or no such session exception. For an instance, let's say that in your framework, you are kind of driver.quit you are doing, but again you are using the driver object for to do something actually. So let's say you are using testng listener, or before test, after test, it's a testng concepts, where you are quitting the browser, but after that still you are using the driver object. So you will get no web driver exception as well. So that is what one more different kind of exception you might get it. Okay, make sure that whenever you are doing driver.quit, after that you shouldn't be using any of the instances of the driver, because when you say driver.quit, the driver becomes null. That's how your browser is closing. Okay, fine. So we have learned almost all kind of frequently appearing the exceptions, and also we have seen how we can handle the exception. So hope this particular session is helpful. Do subscribe to this YouTube channel if you haven't. Thank you for watching.